Hello and welcome along to another interview from the Honest Football Podcast. This week we speak to another former pro with a unique story, and that's former Wycombe, Stevenage and Canada defender Mark ROGERS. We speak to Mark about growing up in Canada, where competitive football opportunities were few and far between, and the search over to England in his late teens to find professional football here in England. We then talk about becoming a fan's favourite at Wycombe following a successful trial before a stint at Stevenage before the end of his career, and the opportunity of course to play for his nation as he was called up to represent Canada. We then talk about the perhaps premature end to Mark's career due to back injuries and what he's been doing since, and the way he stays involved in professional English football while living back home in Canada. Mark's route into professional football is certainly one of the most unique ones we've had on the podcast so far, and we really hope you enjoy it. If you do, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and you can follow us on Twitter to stay up to date at HonestFootball3. But this is Mark ROGERS' footballing story, and we really hope you enjoy it. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by Mark now, and we'll start as we always do, before all the glitz and glamour of being a pro, all of your experiences, the first memory of football, whether it be watching, playing locally. What's the first thing you remember about the game?
Well, funny enough, my parents, I didn't grow up with big footballing background or parents. My dad's from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
He joked, I don't think he'd ever seen a soccer ball until I was on a soccer field. But we were playing on a gravel field. I still remember there was a game going on somewhere around me, but I was making sandcastles on the gravel field.
Yeah.
I think my dad was a little embarrassed. And the herd of players kind of runs around.
Yeah.
That herd ran right through me and my sandcastle. I remember my dad picking me up, me crying and not being very happy about life. But it also kind of went, okay, well, I'm going to start kicking the people and going to try and get the ball.
Yeah.
And that was my first memory, just getting absolutely just run over by a bunch of 7, 8-year-olds or something like that. Yeah.
It's a pretty unique one. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I wasn't good. I don't think I touched the ball for my first 2 seasons. I was rubbish. And so if the Wycombe fans they'll now it'll all make sense when I was smashing balls into the stands for my time at Wycombe. But baseball and basketball were kind of my first 2 loves. Soccer was not my first love. It kind of took me a little while to come to it.
And what about watching the game? Because obviously that's one of the things in the UK we take for granted. There's football coverage everywhere. Probably until quite recently that wasn't necessarily the case. So how did you find the experience of getting into watching football as a young person?
Well, it's funny because my mom's from Liverpool. So my granddad, when I was a little boy, sent me over sort of a couple years after this an Everton kit. He was an Everton supporter. And of course, I didn't know who the heck that was. But there was a show on, and this way predates PVR. I think I probably just came across it. Our national television provider is called CBC. And they had a show called Big League Soccer in the early 80s. I remember watching it and all these goalkeepers flying around, and I just thought it was pretty cool. And it gave me a connection sort of to my English relatives. Like I said, it's so easy to connect with people now. But at that time, you felt a million miles away from my mom's family. So it's a good question. It's probably right around the time where I probably watched that, went into the backyard with my little brother and started smashing balls at each other, try to imitate these guys on the TV. Yeah. But it was half an hour probably every 2 weeks, I think, was the only access we could get. Yeah. In the early 90s, with the proliferation of big sports companies like ESPN, in Canada, TSN, or in England, Sky Sports, it all kind of, at that time, the cable sports packages were coming out. We had a program on our national one's called TSN, and it was called Soccer Saturday. Yeah. And it was 2 hours of highlights from around the world, and it was amazing at that time. All of a sudden, you had access to all this stuff, and they're starting to play games throughout the week and on weekends. So now, you're not just watching highlights, you're watching the highlights and then watching a game. And so that kind of access, when you get to sort of my age, you realize that how important that is, just to access to the real game. And, that's what it's supposed to look like, and it was at that kind of time that we started getting access, kind of early 90s, I think, was when it became far easier. And now, of course, I mean, you can watch any game anywhere, almost too much, maybe. You're spoiled for choice, but it's just a whole different world now compared to when I was a kid.
Absolutely. And the one thing I wanted to ask you, sort of different to other guests we've had on, is what your sort of dreams were when you were a child. Because most people dream of being an athlete or being some form of sportsman. But for yourself, obviously, you probably didn't have exposure to football quite so much at a young age. Were your dreams in other sports, or were your dream, once you were introduced to football, was your main dream football then?
I think as a little boy, I played every sport. It was again a different world. It was more seasonal.
Yeah.
You'd move from one sport to the next sport to the next sport. I think because like a lot of little boys, I looked up to my dad so much, and my dad was a really good baseball player. And so when I was young, I was probably throwing a baseball around more than anything else. Was quite a good. Even when I talked about getting trampled on the gravel field at that age, I was already a pretty good baseball player.
Yeah.
And so my first love was baseball. As far as maybe dreaming, could I, it'd be great to play in the major leagues and thinking about that. You get to a slightly older age, I started dreaming about basketball. I started dreaming about playing soccer, in one of these massive English stadiums. Yeah, so I think it started with baseball, but as I got sort of, 10 to 12 years old, those dreams I was starting to get opportunities in soccer and basketball as well. Yeah, I don't think I really honed in on one thing until and maybe that's part of why you have me on this podcast, because my story is a little bit more unique that way,
Absolutely, yeah.
because I did not focus on soccer until quite a late date.
And I wanted to ask you about you started to mention getting opportunities in football, which is something that's often in the British media portrayed as something that doesn't happen so much in Canada and the US and North America. Is that something that you found easy to get access to, or was it a difficult one to get into?
It was more of a relative statement. I think what I'm meaning is opportunities relative to here. By that age, I'd sort of made a regional team. I live in a city called Delta, south of Vancouver,
Yeah.
and my town is called Tawasin. So I kind of played for Tawasin Soccer Club. Then I made sort of Delta, the city. I was named captain of that team, which at that stage I had no idea what a captain was. I still remember my dad go, "Oh, you're the captain of the team," and I looked at my dad and said, "What does that mean?" I'm still not totally sure what that means, really, except you wear an armband. In all seriousness, I think it was at that where I started going, okay, well, I'm good enough to play on bigger teams than just my local community.
Yeah.
I started thinking, oh, maybe I'm okay at this. It was more a mental thing than anything real. At that stage, there was no professional soccer. The NASL had gone bust. We were just starting and just about to start our own Canadian professional league called the CSL, which eventually went bust
Yeah.
in the early 90s. So there wasn't, I remember, I keep thinking of my dad on this. I kept talking to him and going, well, there is no real, I was sort of starting to play now for provincial level teams. So at that stage, I'd moved to Ontario and was training down in Hamilton, Ontario. I was living in Ottawa, so a 5-hour drive every weekend to go down and train in minus 30 weather, which really challenging. Even then, it was like, where am I going to go with this?
Yeah.
Going down to play on scholarship in the NCAA in the States wasn't really, it was kind of a really rare thing at that stage. Now tons of Canadians are down there, which is great. So yeah, it's funny you talk about opportunity. On the big scale, yeah, I had no idea about anything in England really outside of what I saw on the TV. I had no idea what the level of players were like at my age. I played a couple foreign teams when I was young in American tournaments, but really had no access or no real idea. It was just guessing.
And I guess for you, one of the things we normally ask is, when you were at that sort of level, when you were going through from local to state, did you feel like you were standing out? Did you feel that you were the best player there, or were you a bit of a late bloomer, or did you not really understand even at that point?
I don't think I was. I remember talking to a couple of my teammates on the national team when I was playing for Canada. And I don't know if I was ever the best player on my team, maybe a couple times. I was a decent player. I was always kind of a leader. And at that stage, I played kind of an important position at that. They called it sweeper back then. And I just run around kicking people and I could play with both feet. But from a technical standpoint, at that stage, I played with players that are far more accomplished than me. At that stage, probably had better, more deep upbringings in the game, often of European descent or South American descent. But as we went through, I was a late bloomer. I got to a stage where I started to realize that soccer isn't just about your technique; it is also about your athletic body. And I settled into being quite a good runner and fairly athletic, 6'2", and I think that's kind of more, less so when I was younger. I felt definitely part of these decent teams, and I felt I belonged there for sure. But I didn't feel I was one of the top players. I was doing a job at the back kind of thing. But when I got a little older, I did start to realize that, okay, I'm actually starting to pull away from some of these guys because I simply can outrun them. I'm okay, good enough technically where it's not hurting me. I do remember that sort of by the time I was about 15.
And the main question for me, and I guess the main reason, as we say, you've got a unique story, is going from that point at 15 to then ending up as a young footballer at Wycombe in England, a
Yeah.
club that probably isn't one of the ones you will have seen regularly on the TV. So how did that
No.
come about?
Well, it is a kind of a funny story. I mean, by the time I was 15, I was really focusing more on basketball.
Okay.
But the one thing I did that, wasn't by design, I was asked to start playing men's football when I was really young. To this day, those guys are still really close friends. But that helped me. I got my ass kicked a little bit, but it was faster. I had exposure to guys drinking beers in the dressing room after games, all sorts. But it really toughened me up, but also I grew up quite a bit. And these guys were great. They loved to have a good time, but they made sure they looked after me, and they're good because I think my dad threatened them. Look, if anything happens to my kid, I'm coming for you. They were great, and like I said, to this day are really good friends, a lot of them. But as I got sort of out of high school, which here is sort of 17, 18 years old, I went to the University of British Columbia, which is a really good university here in Vancouver, and I went there on looking at pre-med sciences. I remember my dad said, you don't go to university to play sports, he was kind of wrong about that. But I really became academically focused at that stage. And really my grade 11 and 12 years of high school, I barely played football. I played some men's football. I played a ton of basketball, and that also helped because movement patterns in basketball really do help in soccer. Without you ever training it, it just helps. Steve Nash is a prime example of that. A guy I grew up playing basketball against. He's a year older than I am, and his younger brother and I played for Canada together. And so Steve played he had basically the same upbringing I had. He was a hell of a soccer player, but obviously world-class basketball player. So what I'm trying to say is I barely played football in those years. And the funny part is those are the real important years as a professional football player, because if you're trying to get into the first team at that stage. But while I continued to play men's soccer kind of part-time as much as I could around my studies, I kind of turned my attention. UBC has a very well-regarded men's soccer program. And university, because like I said, we didn't have any professional football, sort of the top young players from sort of the British Columbia and the West Coast. The destination was Simon Fraser University, University of Victoria on Vancouver Island, or University of British Columbia. And they were all, populated with the sort of men's Olympic team, under 23s, and so a lot of young national, provincial level players. Yeah. And so I kind of thought, can I mix that in with my studies and possibly get a little bit of scholarship money towards, my tuition. So I walked on one day, I think it was my third or fourth year, to an open tryout. And now it's funny to look back on because I've now since coached UBC with my old coached the women's team. And open tryouts basically it's more or less just an appeasement to the university to make sure you're including people because they're nowhere near the level. And it almost becomes quite funny. And so I showed up and he came to me and goes, "Who the hell are you? Like, where have you been?" And I said, I just play local men's soccer. At that stage, I was playing in the Vancouver men's league, which is pretty good amateur league. Yeah. He was like, "Wow." And then 3 weeks later, I was starting in the first team, playing for them, and got a scholarship in it. That really kicked me on because I was playing with guys sort of a little bit around my age, but who had done things at a much higher level than I had at that stage within the game in Canada. And I noticed some were very good players, but others I was like, "I'm better than you." That going back to what you said when we were younger, I was like, "No, I can hack it with these guys. Then I wonder what else I can do." At the same time, my little brother was representing British Columbia in the Canada games and was one of the standout players of that tournament. My brother's about 6'5", and he can jump through the roof, and he's super athletic. He's got a lot of tools that I don't have, but he's a gentle lad and really good guy. he started getting a lot of attention about going overseas because he as they say here, he passed the eye test. He leapt off the page. But I look a lot different. I look a lot like my dad. John has, blonde hair, blue eyes, we look quite a bit different at that stage anyway. A guy came to me sort of after my 5th year of university. So I just graduated, said, look, I think you guys could go and play in England. And I was like, really? Hey? And, so bearing in mind, I think I was 21, turning 22.
Yeah.
Not a little kid anymore, right? My brother would have been 19. He was in charge of British Columbia soccer, and he'd kind of come to watch both of us play a number of times.
Yeah.
And said, look, his name was Alan Churchyard, and he's close friends with Alan Ball and a gentleman named Paul Sturrock.
Yeah.
And at that stage, Paul was coaching at St. Johnstone, and Alan Ball was coaching at Portsmouth.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, let's have a go at this. So John and I flew over. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife of 20 years, came with us, and we toured around a little bit around Europe, checked it out, because I was like, my chance of making it as a professional are probably slim. While I'm here, I'm going to check some stuff out, So I went around Europe, had a great time, bumped into a bunch of local guys like running down a beach in Santorini, and they're like, what are you doing, Rogers? And I'm like, I got to go to England and try out. And they thought that was quite funny. They didn't think I had any chance. So ended up in England. Unfortunately, my brother injured himself. Him and I were training, and he rolled his ankle, dislocated it real bad. So that kind of wrecked his time because it was a long-term injury. So he ended up coming back to Canada. I was my wife's family are all English. My wife's family at that time were living in West London and Eastcote, Pinner, sort of Ruislip area.
Yeah.
And great family, really kind. And we were staying with family friends called the Dunworths, and he just had a friend named Dave Kemp, who to this day I think I've only met once. And we were staying, and I had trials at, like I said, first at Portsmouth, then at St. Johnstone, but they were both on a preseason tour. When they got back, I was going to go on tour. Long story short, Dave Kemp phoned Steve Dunworth, the gentleman who I was staying with, the family friends of my wife's, and he said, have you ever heard of Wycombe Wanderers? And I said, no, I'd never heard of them. He said, well, it's not far from you. It's just down the M40. Would you be open to training there for a week? And I said, absolutely, because it would give me some idea of what I was getting into, right? No commitment from either party. So off I went to rent a car from a place called Rent-A-Dent. And I'm not kidding. Yeah, it's the name of the I'll never forget. I'd never driven on that side of the road. Yeah. And I drove a little bit of what we call standard. What do you guys call it? Manual? Or yeah. So I wasn't that good at that either. And I literally hit every curb. I remember getting onto the M40 and laughing. I'm in this little box of what. And I am just people are flying by me, and I'm just doing my best to try and find my way to this place. And I pulled up at Adams Park, and I'll never forget the first time I saw it. And I was like, oh, wow, nice ground. Like, I thought, they said it's Division II, and I thought I'd be showing up to play at a park or something like that, like I said, I had no context on what lower league football was. Showed up, beautiful ground, ended up driving out to their preseason out at Halton, RAF Halton, and kind of went from there, really. But yeah, like I said, not many people walk on at their university team playing part-time football, very part-time around their studies. I guess being a late bloomer helped me in that regard, but so many late bloomers, kind of their dreams are over before they started.
I've got to say, trying to find Wycombe as the first ground in England to go to is hard for most English people, to be fair.
Yeah. Oh, man. I was white knuckling it down the M40, and this sucker was maxed out at probably 60 miles per hour. I had a crap car for years, and the lads just absolutely annihilated me. Because they'd pull in their nice motors, and I was like, I'm not buying one of those. I'm going to be saving the money because this could be over tomorrow.
I love the fact that you mentioned that during probably those years that everything centered around you barely play football at all. Like, even in England now, the homegrown system is designed to help players that have trained between 15 and 21 at a club. The fact that you say you barely played during that time, or you were playing very part-time, I found absolutely fascinating.
When I did play, I played very much like an English player without knowing it. Very aggressive. One of my best attributes was I was very good in the air. And I take that from basketball, rebounding and baseball, catching fly balls.
Yeah.
It's just judging the flight of the ball, and then it's your timing and your leap. Those attributes in an English League One game are pretty important. A lot of aerial balls. But
Absolutely.
honestly, although I was playing local football, but I was probably playing 10 to 20 men's games a season.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's
you know
amazing.
yeah, so training when I could around my studies. But yeah, once I started playing for the UBC men's team, now you're training every day and
Yeah.
sometimes twice a day. In those 2 years when I was playing for UBC before I graduated, I played all the time, and that's where I started to notice massive improvement.
And when we go to Wycombe, obviously, you've now had a bit of experience of training full time. You're going to a club in England for the first time, and you're getting to compete with people and see, as you said, what is this really like? What am I getting myself into? When you went into train for that first day, how overawed were you? What was your main emotion going into it?
I think one of my best attributes that was I too was I was an athlete, so I could really run, and I could jump, and I could do all that. Technically, I was okay, but certainly I was watching these guys play with the ball who were far more advanced than me. I played a little bit of central midfield at that stage, but knew I would really struggle in that role in England.
Yeah.
The speed of play in that area of the park was in. My dad, why don't you play there anymore? Because I wouldn't have a job if I played there. That's why. So I kind of gravitated to the center back and right back position where there's a little more space and everything's in front of you. But the other attribute I have is I'm really stubborn. If my family watches this, they're going to laugh when they hear me say that. I can be a grump. I'm a real stubborn guy. And I kind of made up my mind, if I'm going to go and do this, I'm doing it all the way. I'm going to go until a number of people say you're just not good enough, and until that, I'm not going to back off anybody. I'm not going to be shy about it. I was definitely quiet. I'm not going to burst into a dressing room. I don't have that kind of personality where I'm going to have a lot of bravado, but I wasn't going to be shy on the field. And I was going to, if I had to put a big tackle in on a star player, I'll put a big tackle in on the star player. I didn't care. I didn't care where anybody was from. I didn't care about their accents. I barely understood what the hell they were saying. Most of them with the Cockney rhyming slang, I was like, they're talking in absolute gibberish. I went out with a real focus. I'm going to get after this. I'm going to compete and see how I do. And what happened at the end of that first week, I remember the first exercise I did, I actually got chucked with kind of the guys coming off injury and some youth team players to kind of see if I could hack it.
Yeah.
And one guy in particular was in that group, and he was an excellent player. His name was Paul McCarthy.
Yeah.
And became a good friend of mine and sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And Macca, I got put into basically it's almost like a gauntlet. It's a square. You got two players one's trying to keep the ball with all the players on the outside, and the other's trying to get it back off him. Yeah. And it quickly devolves into is just kicking the living out of each other. And that's what happened with me and Paul. And I think Paul had the hump with me, and I was like, damn, if they're all as tough as this guy, I'm in trouble. Because I was kind of in Canada, that, like I said, I played like an English player, and not everybody did that here. So I was kind of known, not a hard man, but guy that wasn't scared to put a tackle in, win a header, put his head where it hurts. And I'm like, this dude is every bit of anything I've got and then some. Yeah. So yeah, it was like, okay, I bet I need to be at my best all the time here if they're all like him. Because he was an excellent player. And so I got access throughout the week. They're like, yeah, this lad, Canadian lad, because you trialists just fall out of the sky into professional teams. They're all the time. So I was just another guy with a weird accent. In the NFL, they call them Jags, just another guy. And that was me. So as the week went on, I still remember Wednesday I got to train with the first team guys. And we trained in more of a group activity. And they were good. There were some good players, like guys like Keith Ryan, Steve Brown, Davey Carroll, Jason Cousins, real club guys that had helped be a part of those teams that took them out of non-league with Martin O'Neill into the football league. And they were very good players. But I didn't feel I was light years away. I felt I needed a little work, certainly from a tactical. And I learned on the go, because that Saturday, by the end of the week, they asked me to be in the squad for a preseason game at Chesham. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I want to do that, because that stage I still hadn't heard back from Portsmouth and St. John's. They said, look, there's no commitment either way. Yeah. You can leave whenever you want. And played. And I remember sitting there on the bench, and at that stage, I think you only had 3 subs. Yeah. And I don't think you had 3 people on the bench.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember. I think that was it. Maybe 2 subs. I have a hard time remembering. Too many concussions. But what happened in that game, I still remember sitting down and I'm like, okay, so what division's Chesham in? Looking, okay, well they're like a league below at that stage the conference.
Yeah.
We're like 4 divisions higher than them. We're gonna absolutely smash this team. That'll be easy. Wasn't easy. I could not believe how good they were
Yeah.
and that's when it was a wake up call. It was, holy smokes, this is just such a cultural thing here, that the depth of talent in this on this island is staggering. And you dropped 3 divisions in Vancouver, they could barely run. I mean, you're winning 400-0, you drop a couple divisions in England and these boys can play, and I could not believe how good they were. And I came on with 20 minutes left, and the score, I think they were winning 1-0. We ended up winning something like 4-1, and I played central midfield. And honestly, I had an out of body experience. For 20 minutes, everything I did came off. I set up Danny Bowman, who's still playing to this day. Can't believe for a goal, like a 30-yard ping in behind, and he volleyed it in. And it's just sort of one of those. I had my moment, and I took it. That 20 minutes set me up, because after the game, Neil Smiley took me aside and said, "Look, we want you to stay for a bit. We see a lot of potential, but they didn't offer me anything. We just want to have a better look at you." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to close the door on that. I've just put a week of work in." It took an age to get my papers sorted. So I basically trained without playing, because by the time they get into official games, non-preseason games, you have to have your clearance. Yeah. So I couldn't play in, I think it's called the combination back then, the old reserve league. It was really frustrating. And so finally they set me up. It was a last chance saloon. They're like, "Look, we're going to have to make a decision on you, but we can't make a decision until we see you play in a game, actual game." So they set me up in a training game at Crystal Palace, and I had a really good game. I can't remember who I was playing. I think he was a Croatian forward, and did well against him. And then after the game, they offered me a non-contract, £100 a week. I almost ripped his arm off for that. Just to forget the money. It was just the acknowledgement from somebody that is that deep in the game, and such a awesome, wonderful football and country, to acknowledge that I was good enough to play at that level or close, was enough for me. And so that's when it all really started.
The only other question I really wanted to ask you about that early spell at Wycombe is, do you feel that not knowing really anything about them beforehand, or not having any idea of what the reputations were like, did you think that helped you, because you were going in blind almost?
Yeah, absolutely. Where you could almost see English players when they're playing what they would consider more accomplished players, the respect they had for each other. And I think it was too much respect. Certainly that I respected the heck out of those guys for what they were as players. And what I got, especially as I lived there for a few years, got to understand, it's almost the Hunger Games of development. They've clawed and scratched their way through youth football. Yeah. And so few of them make it into the first team, that you have to respect that, acknowledge that. But initially, if you have too much respect for them, you're not gonna play. You're gonna play within yourself. You're gonna play cautious, safe football. And I didn't, and I think that my stubborn nature kind of helped me just put my head down and just calmly get after it and go all out. I think that's what it takes. I think a lot of young players, when I talk to young Canadian players that want to play over there, I say, listen, you get over there, you go for it. You can't, don't be shy. And I mean, you can be quiet, but there's a difference between being quiet and being shy. You have to go over there believing in yourself, but you have to go over there getting ready to compete. And I mean, in every aspect. The competition is only a fragment of what you do on the training ground and in games. Competition, what you're eating, how you're resting. Are you thinking about the game? That's the fine lines and margins for whether you make it or you don't make it. Can't just be what you're doing on the training ground and then going home and touring London or doing whatever. You have to be completely and solely dedicated to it if you're a person like me. Now, if you're a super talented guy, maybe you can get away with cutting some corners, but a guy like Danny, I haven't talked to Danny Bowman in a long time. I can guarantee you if I had a chat with him now, and he was one hell of a player when I played with him at Stevenage and Wycombe, I guarantee you that he's still in the game because of what he does off the pitch, just as much as what he does on it.
Absolutely. And I want to move on a little bit to your professional debut with Wycombe. And I want to ask, we ask every pro this and probably get the biggest variety of answers you could imagine. is the main emotion when you found out you were in the matchday squad and then when you found out you were playing?
I knew I was going to be in the squad. We had a lot of injuries. And my first professional game, was actually in the cup. Actually, that's not true. That was my first full game.
Yeah.
But I'd come on as sub against Notts County at Meadow Lane. I loved England because the sound, I don't know if it's changed since then, but it was so loud and it was just amazing to be a part of. So you're packed full of adrenaline.
Yeah.
And I remember the manager at that stage, now Laurie Sanchez, had come in, and
Yeah.
Laurie had given me my first full contract. Just to backtrack one step, Laurie Sanchez was a tough dude, man.
Yeah.
You know, he came in and said to us, I remember I was in the reserves, so now I was on a non-contract. He goes, "You guys have 3 games. You are the shit players in a shit squad. So because we were bottom of the league at that stage, and he came in to rescue us. I had 3 reserve games to prove it, and I scored a goal and kept 3 clean sheets. And then he offered me, I was his first kind of signing.
Yeah.
So fast forward a few months, now it's the next season. We'd stayed up, miracle, beat Man City at Main Road, won against Lincoln last day to just nudge out in I think it was the 84th minute, Paul Emblem goal. And now we fast forward through preseason. I had a really good preseason, and now I'm starting to not just be known as a reserve player. And people don't understand. At that stage we had like 30 odd professionals in the team, so I'm kind of moving my way up. And I got on the bench against Notts County, so I'm in the kind of top 14-ish players because they didn't have the big benches they do now, and came on a sub. I remember the speed of the game even then being like, I'm struggling to keep up here. I'm not used to the difference between reserve football and first team football was noticeable to me. And I remember after I did okay, another probably 20 minutes, and Laurie Sanchez, being the nice guy that he is, just walked in. He goes, "Ted," I looked over. He goes, "They told me you were fast." Just absolutely eviscerated me my first game. And I don't know if that was to bring me down to earth or to say you better get faster or else you're not going to be here long. But I started the next game because we had some injuries, and we played Oxford City, not Oxford United, in the first round of the cup at home. I played center half, and it started to move from there. But I remember Sean Devine running over to me and being like, "You can do this. You're going to be fine." And I'm like, "You're only running over because you're not sure I can do this and that I'm going to be fine." Right? But you're nervous, man. That first game in front of a home crowd, people are looking at you. Who is this guy? Right. And I always kind of had the ability just to, again, just go for it. Don't be hesitant, and hopefully good things happen. And when bad things do happen, they do to every center back or full back, eventually you just have to learn how to overcome that, because it is a pretty, not a humiliating, but it almost like, it's hard to put into words how that feels when you've made like an own goal or a penalty, and it's not a great feeling, let me tell you.
The one thing I wanted to ask you on that note, and you've led onto it quite nicely, is there's always this big thing in England, and I guess in most countries, about when it's a homegrown player, a player that's come through the academy, or a local player. Did you feel from the fans that you were treated any differently because you weren't local? Did you feel you still got the same opportunity or the same chance to impress them?
Fans were awesome to me. They were great. It was a team full of English and the occasional British, Irish, and Scottish, home nations kind of players. And so, I was a little different. I came from a much different background. Obviously my accent's different, but I think they liked my commitment. They could suffer kind of some of my lack of tactical awareness initially with my just English supporters really appreciate people that are going to put their face in front of a shot or win a big tackle or block a tackle, and just that they show that they're almost a representation of what they would be, because they believe so much in their club and the community and the culture surrounding their club, that they want to see someone that cares as much as them. And I think they appreciate that about me, and were forgiving of some of my other failings. But also I was one of my sponsors was the Independent Supporters Club. Okay. So right off the bat, they sponsored me, and I got to know those guys and gals. They actually really helped my wife. We didn't have children at that stage, so my wife traveled to a lot of our away games on the supporters coach with them. Yeah. And even I did when I wasn't in the squad leading into when I was getting into the first team,
Yeah.
I went and watched, at the Man City game at Main Road I went with the supporters. So I think that ingratiated me to them. Is I didn't think anything of it. Like, I didn't think because of my background, I was like, I'm just like one of you guys. I mean, I was just one of you 5 minutes ago. So why would I be? So to this day, I'm still in touch with them. They still send me their fanzine via post.
Yeah.
When I brought my son back for the Tottenham 4th round game at White Hart Lane, I brought Sam, my little boy. He's quite a keen footballer, good, much better than I was at his age, that's for sure. He's 11. I brought him back to see that game, and we went on the supporters coach with all the same old guys and girls. So yes, I think the fans were wonderful to me. They treated me really well, but they had high expectations. If I wasn't good enough, then hey, you're a nice lad, Ted, but you're gone.
Yeah.
And as you've done your research, my nickname was Ted because of Ted Rogers, the old game show guy, which it took me about a year and a half to find out. It was just, they kept doing 3-2-1 all the time at me. And I found out about this guy, Dusty Bin, and all that. And the Wycombe fans treated me great, but pull no punches as far as assessment. If I had a bad game, they told me straight to my face. I still appreciate that about them. I appreciate their passion for the game. Would they have treated me as similar as a local or homegrown player? I don't know. It's having not been a homegrown player, but certainly they loved when players came through, whether it was Danny Senda, who came from Southampton as a youth player and finished his youth at Wycombe, or Roger Johnson. They definitely had a warm feeling for those guys when they came through the youth. But I think there was some animosity initially, as I'm in my early 20s, and these guys have gone through that experience, which is so difficult, and I kind of just walked in, and I don't blame them, but that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, right?
And I guess as you became a regular for Wycombe over the next sort of couple of years, it then brought international opportunities about, which is of course probably the holy grail for most footballers. So talk to me about that opportunity when it came about. How did you find out? And again, the reaction must have been incredible then.
Oh, it was fantastic. I got a call from a gentleman named Les Wilson, who played for Wolves. He's a local legend in Vancouver. He was sort of head of scouting and in charge of overseeing, calling the players in and managing sort of the camps and all that. And he phoned me. And at this stage, I was dirt poor. My wife and I had nothing. I was living in more or less a crack house in part of Wycombe. And I'm not kidding. It was brutal. Guys peeing in bathtubs, and it was just not nice. But I remember sitting on this crappy old staircase. Things were starting to move for me as far as I'm starting to get a little bit more money. And so we were very quickly going to move out, but I got the phone call saying, you are on our radar. And it was at the end of sort of before I'd even gotten into the first team. It was sort of the end of that. I just signed, end of that first season where I talked about going up to Main Road and all that. I hadn't even been called into the camp yet. But it was just, you're on our radar. We're watching you closely. Keep up what you're doing. You're doing a great job. And I just felt 20 feet tall. I'm like, this is my country, it was such a motivator for me. I love my country. I love England now too. It's like a second home. But as a Canadian, getting an opportunity to represent my country in any sport was always a dream. It ended up being soccer. But at the start of that season, when I started breaking into the first team, Laurie Sanchez brought me into his office, said, look, there's a scout here. His name was Paul James. He played in, Canada's only been to one World Cup in 1986, and he played in that team. And so I knew who he was. And we were playing at home against Millwall. And he took me aside after the game, had a chat and said, look, you played well. And it was just another 7 out of 10 average performance, which I kind of became known for, just average. Paul came in and said, look, you did well. You'll probably be hearing from us shortly. And literally within days, I was called in to play against Panama in a World Cup qualifier in Winnipeg. And back then we had a manager named Holger Osiek, who managed us to a Gold Cup championship in 2000. I was in the squad for that, but I didn't go. So they only took 18. And I was told, look, if somebody gets hurt, you're going to come in for that. They won it, which was just unbelievable. Right after that fall after that, I was brought in to play against Panama in Winnipeg. And he used to bring all the Central American teams to places in November and October that, let's just say, are less hospitable. And it was probably -10 at kickoff. It was freezing cold.
Yeah.
And these lads had every bit of gear on they could find. Hats, toques, we call them here, and gloves. And I knew we'd won the game before it started. They didn't want anything to do with it. And so I came on as a sub there. I flew back a month later for another game against Mexico. Didn't come on as sub. Being a center back's hard, because you don't get a lot of sub opportunities. And we had some very good center backs, all playing in England at that time. Jason DeVos, Mark Watson, Paul Fennick, guys that were not just in their teams, captains of their clubs, Wigan, Oxford United, and Hibs for Paul. And so it was tough to get in past those guys or get opportunities, but just going with your national team is something special. But at that time, they didn't have international dates, right? So I was missing games for Wycombe, and Laurie Sanchez didn't like it. But I'm going, look, this is my dream, and I'm not going to say no if my country comes calling for me. It was an anxious time because you're so excited to be a part of this. But in England, you give a guy a chance to take your job there, your professional career could be very short-lived because that's how good the players are that are coming in to take your position. Fortunately for me, I came back and during that time was able to get my place back quite quickly or sometimes immediately. It was kind of a exciting and anxious time all at once, right? But yeah, getting the call for your country is, I don't think you'll interview anybody else that says it's not up there with one of their greatest achievements.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I guess we need to move on towards the end of your time at Wycombe. But I would be in trouble probably with any Wycombe fan listening if before I moved on to Stevenage, I didn't ask you about recent events at Wycombe. Slightly off topic, which is how did you find that? Because I know you've already been on a couple of podcasts for Wycombe talking about it, but that must have been quite a nice moment for you to watch.
Yeah, I'm still. It's just over a week later. I can't. Yeah. I still get my head around it. I can't. I mean, we were at that time. Bearing in mind, we got to the FA Cup semi-final. Yeah. I don't know if they were putting more money into playing staff then as now. And bearing in mind, that's 20 years ago. Yeah. We were kind of looking at the championship. There was a goal, and I think that FA Cup run team was our best team that I played in. Yeah. But also, that FA Cup run kind of derailed that momentum towards really pushing to get in. We were kind of mid-table many years, and we wanted to really push to get towards the playoffs and into the championship. And that FA Cup run added so many fixtures, and we had so many injuries that it really hurt our league form. Yeah. And we stayed up, and it was all fine. I don't think we were ever in real danger of going down that season. But that was sort of the last team, I believe, that really fought to get, or was considered to have an opportunity or chance of getting near the championship. Yeah. What makes this even more special is what's kind of happened to Wycombe over the last 8 years is massive financial problems. Yeah. Almost going out of the league on the last day, staying up, needing 2 other results to go their way. Gareth Ainsworth coming in, and I've only had the opportunity to meet him once, and I say this every time I get a chance. He was one hell of a player. Yeah. Gareth was a fantastic player. I had the opportunity to play against him a few times, and he's outdoing that with his management. Yeah, he's gotten to a point where he's taken almost no resources, and every season since that near relegation moved them forward. The Coig family comes in from New Orleans. I've had an opportunity to talk to Pete. What a character. You could just tell that family's injected a lot of enthusiasm into that club. I've kept in touch with Matt over the years. He kind of was a kid when he watched me play. His dad and I know each other fairly well from my time there. And I could not speak more highly about a person. He has been such a part of keeping that community and that culture around that club and that family club together, which I feel is really special, to the point where he's like, it's just great that you're still involved. I said, why wouldn't I be? I love being a part of this. So they've done an amazing job. Going back to what I said, we kind of were pushing for that. They achieved it, and they didn't just achieve it. They achieved it against all the odds. They didn't have even a full squad of players preseason. I mean, over the years, my brother John mentioned to me, they've spent like £10,000 on players over the last 8 seasons. It's all loans, and it's not just loans. They're getting guys like Alfie Mawson. Every time he seems to get a guy in on loan, he doesn't just do well. He exceeds expectations, and that has to have something to do with Gareth and his staff. For me, I'm biased, but it's an all-time football story, against the odds type story. And I'm so proud of those guys. It's just wonderful to be a part of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a fantastic story over here. Definitely this season. It's been a special one for Wycombe. And hopefully, if my club Luton survive tomorrow night, we'll be playing each other next season.
I loved those games. Loved them because that's a great atmosphere at Kenilworth Road.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed playing there. And it's not far from Wycombe, so you're not driving all the way up to Preston and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Which
So
I didn't enjoy.
I'm hoping that we'll get that fixture at least twice next season.
Yeah. I think you have a chance, man.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, good luck.
I want to move on to the end of your spell at Wycombe, obviously after a huge number of appearances, and then you moved even closer to my home now, which was Stevenage.
Yeah.
So tell me how that move came about.
Well, it's funny. Tony Adams came in. So Laurie Sanchez had moved on, and as I said, I was Laurie's first signing. I think Laurie, although he was a man not of very, really tough old school guys, we never really had any heart to hearts, or his comment was, if I need to motivate you, I don't really want you here, and if I need to talk to you or coddle you, then you're not for me. Yeah, so I didn't really get to know Laurie as a person very well, other than do this or don't. If you don't, you're not in the team. If you do, you stay in the team. It's really easy. He left, sadly, because I was kind of his type of player.
Yeah.
John Gorman came in initially, interim, and he lifted the whole place because he has such a bubbly personality, so different than Laurie. And Laurie's assistant, Terry Gibson, was also a very bubbly guy, just a wonderful guy. His job kind of was to lift the dressing room. John Gorman came in, did a wonderful job of getting everybody motivated because we were struggling. Tony Adams came in, and I still remember, he was my hero as a kid. Once I started being able to watch football in the 90s, he was, Mr. Captain for Arsenal and just a dominant force in the English game. And he came in, and I still remember, I'm telling my brother, John, Tony Adams is going to be my manager, man. Like, this is crazy. Yeah. Bit of a hero worship thing. And he came in, it just didn't work at all. And I think you've seen the videos of him coaching at Granada. It was really strange. We needed Tony Adams, the Arsenal captain, and I think he became quite a cerebral person. Yeah. Soft spoken too, like not anything I would have thought of Tony Adams. And he came in, and I think he tried to take more of an Arsene Wenger approach with a league or a Division 2 team, League One now team, and it just did not fly. It didn't work. He made some baffling decisions as far as he just immediately took all the experienced players out of the team. I remember we were playing Rushden and Diamonds, and one of my future teammates for Stevenage said, we couldn't believe it when we came into, and then we saw the team sheet come in. There's a bunch of youth team players, good youth team players, just no experience. And you're in a relegate. This is like October, November, and we got battered at home. And, he bombed out players like Darren Curry, myself, guys like Michael Simpson, Danny Bowman, Paul McCarthy had gone, and guys had a bit of experience. After that game, he said, I'm not scared to take us down. And this is like October, November. And the Wycombe supporters were not happy about it. It's a game of opinions. He didn't rate me. He said, look, you're not in my plans. Really quickly. I don't think he'd even watch me play. Maybe he'd watch me play on video, which is fine. And that's just the game. That's no problem. I want to send you out on loan, and Stevenage has come in for you. And I knew who Stevenage were at that stage, and they had done well. And Graham Westley, I'd spoken to Graham Westley, the manager at that time, went on loan, and I really enjoyed it. It was because it's the first time I played for another club after many years at Wycombe, and it was fresh. And I felt my confidence had taken a bit of a beating by then. I'd lost a bit of self-belief. Yeah. And I went there, and it was kind of like it was me a year before. I was just confident. The level of play was slightly lower. They were playing in the conference. Very combative, suited me. I had a couple great months there. Enjoyed it. Tony had told me he was going to watch all my games, everything. And if I may have won Player of the Month one of the 2 seasons, but if I didn't, I was close. I was playing really, really well. I came back, and he brought me in for a meeting, and I said, well, do you watch all the games? I just got Player of the Month, and I've been playing well. He goes, no, I haven't watched any of it. And it's again, this is professional football. This is not throwing any aspersions at Tony Adams, but it just took all the air out of me. And because at that stage, Wycombe, I felt so deeply about the place and the club that it just hurt. It became personal with me. I let it become personal with me, and I shouldn't have. And if I had more, that's what the youth upbringing. If I had more of a youth upbringing over there, I probably would have dealt with it differently. But I didn't. I was mad about it. I still had a year left on my contract, and I just wanted to play, and I wanted to be in a place where I felt appreciated. It really was as simple as that. So I took a pay cut to go to Stevenage instead of staying on at Wycombe, which I regret because Tony left. And it's the only regret I have in football. I should have stayed at Wycombe. I should have ended my time at Wycombe. I was thinking more with my heart and less with my head. I should have just been more calm and patient. But I went to Stevenage, all good. Danny Bowman came with me at the same time, friend from all those years. I played our first game together at Wycombe and our last game together, kind of thing. Went to Stevenage, so I had a guy I knew, great group of lads there. It didn't fit in very well with Graham Wesley, and I'm sure you're aware of him.
Yes.
Over time, just some of the belittling. I was at a stage, so I'm in my early 30s, and belittling me, my country and stuff. I was kind of past that. I'm not a kid where I'll just put up with it. You know, he's made me vice captain with Jason Goodliff as the captain, and I didn't like him. I didn't like him. I didn't like how he spoke to me or the team. He didn't take any feedback on what we were doing or what I thought. You know, I wasn't enjoying it. And then I started to develop a really bad back injury, and my knees started to go. So sort of my head wasn't right, my back wasn't right, my knees weren't right. And my wife at the same time was saying, look, I've loved being in England now, getting close to a decade, wouldn't mind getting back to Canada. So at the end of that season, I decided to move back and my time in England. And it was only with regret that I didn't have an opportunity to stay with Wycombe for that year. Because I probably would have been the last season because, like I said, my knees and back were not good and really limiting my ability to compete at that level. So it probably had another year of shelf life left at Wycombe regardless. And then I wish I'd have done that. But I'm really glad I met a lot of people at Stevenage. They were good people. The fans were great to me, appreciated me. It's just I had such an affinity with Wycombe that I wish I'd have stayed there for that last year.
I guess the final question I wanted to ask you in terms of your career was moving on from that then to coaching, which is something you've got into and you talked about earlier on. Was that something you'd always intended, or was it sort of forced about by the injuries then?
When I moved back to raise a family. I moved back to my hometown. So I'm, you know, where I'm sitting right now is my hometown here in Tawasin. And what happened was, you know, I didn't move back to be involved in football. I probably would have stayed in England to be involved in football, you know. But what happened is very quickly after I moved back, my old coach from university, Mike Mosier, who's now a very dear friend of mine, contacted me to see if I'd help him out. And at the same time, Mark Watson had retired, a gentleman I mentioned earlier, who I played for Canada with, who was a UBC alumni as well. And so we went and helped Mike coach the men's team. And I did it more or less for nothing. I just retired. I had time on my hands, and we went and won a national championship. And it was a really special experience for me, spending that time with those guys. And Mike said, you should consider getting into coaching. At that time, there wasn't many coaching opportunities here. There just no professional football. I got contacted and went in for an interview with our provincial governing body, BC Soccer. Spent a couple years there. Then I moved into coaching locally and sort of being a part of the club. I've done that locally for 12 years now. Went and coached the women's team at UBC, continued to help with the men's team. So I was doing all these things that I was passionate about. You know, the groups that I was passionate about were my local soccer club, trying to give some opportunities to local football that I didn't have as a kid. My university, my provincial association. And then when I left UBC as a coach, I got contacted by an old coach of mine for Canada, Colin Miller, and he asked me to come, and he was put in charge as an interim head coach for the national team after Stephen Hart had been let go. And he brought me in to help him sort of transition into a new coach. And that was an awesome experience, coaching the national team. So I had an opportunity to both play and coach the men's national team, which was great. And I continued. That's sort of at the same time I was getting into broadcasting. And it goes back to what we said. And that's been about 5 or 6 years of doing that now. So, I mean, it's pretty much every layer of the game I've been involved in now. You know, I've even been a part of, in a small part, but a part of helping create a professional league in Canada. And what I've been a part of is linking that league to university football. So it's unique where university players of a certain standard can play professional football without losing their ability to go and play at the university level. Whereas in the United States, you can't. The minute you play professional football, you've lost your eligibility. Those type of programs I've aided in because of my background in university sport. Just continue to do local soccer as well and broadcasting and interviews like this. So yeah, I didn't move back to get involved in football. In fact, one of the things I was becoming a fireman. My baby brother's a fireman. A ton of my ex-teammates, guys I played for Canada with, are firemen. But I got kind of pulled into the game, and there's been a few regrets there too, by the way. A few headaches, a few sleepless nights when you're involved in soccer in Canada. But it's been a pleasure, and I enjoyed talking about the game now and watching my son come through and my daughter play. It's been great.
I absolutely love that. The fact that you've gone back, not with the aim of being involved in football, and have done almost every role since you've gone back, is absolutely fantastic. Just shows the love's there somewhere.
Yeah, I love football. Yeah, I love it. But I also love being a part of trying to come up with things that'll make the future generation have more opportunity and be better than my generation. When in those frustrating moments, that's what I think about, is this will help the next group of kids coming through have opportunities. So yeah, it's things are on the up here. You know, we have a professional league. We have 3 teams playing in the MLS in Canada. Talent staying in Canada instead of going to the NCAA. They're seeing opportunity to remain in Canada and play. So we're not having that drain of players down south, which is good for our national programs. And they don't have to get on an airplane to go and slug it out with guys like Paul McCarthy at Wycombe as an intro to professional football. They can stay here and kind of cut their teeth before they have to go and do that. So I think that's that makes me proud just to know that's a part of my landscape here now.
Yeah, definitely something to be proud of. And as you've mentioned teammates, we'll finish with the usual quick fire questions. So very quickly, the best player you've played with and against in your career?
Best all-around player I played with was Keith Ryan. He could do everything. But there were better goal scorers, better defenders, more exciting players. Darren Curry was wonderful. But I'll say Keith Ryan because he just was everything I loved in a teammate, but also as a player.
Yeah.
Best player I played with. Best player I played against was Gianfranco Zola.
Wow.
I had an opportunity to play against guys like Bergkamp, and I had an opportunity to play against some of the world's, Nedved. I played against the Czech Republic. I have Robbie Keane's jersey downstairs when I played against Ireland with Canada. Yeah. So I've had an opportunity to play against some great players, but Zola, it was just a preseason game against Chelsea. I remember playing with Paul McCarthy, and his intelligence, it was staggering. Yeah. At no moment did I not have to think about what he's doing. He forced the communication between the 2 center halves and the 2 central midfielders at that stage at a level I'd never experienced, because he was taking up new positions and he was telling the players around him what he was going to do. I still remember him yelling, Frank. If you go tight to him, Zendin's, he just would watch. They'd all watch Zola's movement and then attack the spaces he created at light speed, right?
Yeah.
I remember I got to go tight to him because every time he faces me, and now it's a nightmare. So I go tight to him, and it's a one-touch layoff to Frank Lampard, one-touch pass into the channel. Now Paul McCarthy's, Ted, don't go tight. Don't go tight. So I sit in, and now he's turning, and now he's just at you, which is now even harder. So it's just all game. They beat us 1-0. He scored a 35-yard screamer, and he said, I remember he went off, and I had an opportunity just to speak to him briefly after the game, and I just said that was a pleasure to be on the field with you. Yeah. Like, the best all-round footballer I've ever played against. The guy was amazing.
It's not a bad name to be able to give, definitely. And some of the others were good contenders as well. What about your favourite manager that you've worked under? Doesn't have to be the best, but your favourite.
My favourite manager is not somebody I became very close with, Lori Sanchez. He's my favourite because he gave me an opportunity to play the game I love. I'm so appreciative of that. I wish I'd have got to know him as a person better. I'd love to reconnect with a guy like him now, 20 years on kind of thing. And maybe speak to him as a human being and not just a boss, because I know he's a good person. It's just that the type of environment he went through with the crazy gang. But I have so much time for him, and included with that is Terry Gibson. Yeah. His assistant manager was awesome. They were great. He was really light and bubbly, Terry, and Gaffer was tough and stern. I thought they were a good combo.
And the final one is the favorite game that you were involved in your career, and you've obviously got a lot to choose from. If you could pick one out.
I'm gonna just focus on Wycombe because it's hard to compare playing in the Gold Cup for Canada in a tournament and getting third place. We lost on penalties in the semifinal. There are some moments in there that I really loved. Yeah. But I'm gonna just focus on Wycombe, and probably the favorite game in it. There were lots of games where like, holy cow, this is a great game. You know it when you're playing in one. You're like, this is just back and forth. And I'm looking to the cup run, the FA Cup run. maybe my favorite game to be a part of. Any of those home games were great because there were people in the trees. It was just overflowing with crowds. But I'll focus on one. It was an away game. It was against Grimsby away. And now Grimsby was a championship club at that stage, a good one. And they battered us at home, and somehow we come away with a draw. Murdered us. I don't know how and we went up there with no hope, really. And we just played free, and I scored the third goal to win 3-1 away. Big upset, big. And that's when we started to believe, like, wait a minute here, we can do something. That game, I scored the goal, and because I scored the goal, and it was one of my fondest moments. I was on a corner, just a header. Probably that game, or the Wolves game, the next game at home, where it was packed house, and we beat Wolves, who was a championship club as well. We beat them 2-1 at home, and that one of those two. So that week was great. But I'll go with Grimsby away.
I had a feeling it would end with the cup run. It is probably the perfect way to end for Wycombe supporters watching. And for me, I thought this would be a unique football story, and it certainly has been. It's been fantastic to listen to. So I can't thank you enough for your time, Mark.
It's my pleasure. Thanks.